Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. We are here with our second episode of this week. If you missed the first one, definitely follow up on that. Go back to Tuesday's episode with Josh Pate, late kick coverage extraordinaire throughout the 24/7 Sports Network into the CBS Sports platform as well. Everyone, I think, knows who Josh Pate is. We usually get him a couple times per year, and we got him for about 40 minutes on our Tuesday episode, breaking down this 2024 Penn State squad, the expectations, the question marks around this group, the new look Big Ten Conference, which adds 4 teams from the Pac-12. So there's a lot to look at in that landscape. And then ultimately the college football playoff expansion. Now that the door is open for 12 teams instead of 4 teams, what does that mean for programs like Penn State? And Josh gave us a very straight answer toward the end of that episode on whether or not he thinks Penn State will make the college football playoff later here in 2024. So check back that one. As I promised on Tuesday, we are going to go all in on recruiting coverage here with our Thursday episode. And to do that, I bring on board Daniel Gallen and Tyler Calvaruso, my colleagues at Lions247.com. Each of us was out at a camp practice field on Sunday throughout the day. Daniel and I, along with Mark and Grace Brennan, were over at State College High School's Memorial Field, a great venue for an event that we got to cover. The Elite 11, a bunch of quarterbacks were in town, other position players as well. I think we had 4 or 5 Penn State commits to work our way through. There's a bunch of highlights over at 24/7 Sports and Lions247sports.com, but we're going to break it down here player by player a little bit better. And Tyler Calvaruso was down with Brian Doan at the Baltimore Under Armour camp on Sunday, where he got a look at a bunch of other Nittany Lions targets. There's some forward-thinking names to talk about in the 2026 and 2027 class, but the bulk of our conversation here will focus on the 2025 class, some commits, some priority targets. Official visits are coming, so it's a key time, and I appreciate you both for joining us.
Yeah, it was a very good weekend, and it was nice to see so many 24/7 sports people in State College and down in Baltimore. And I think we came out with a pretty comprehensive look at everyone, in the region.
Yeah, I think we covered all of our bases over the weekend for sure. It was a good time being on the camp circuit, seeing everyone, seeing a lot of talented kids too. So I enjoyed it. I know you guys had a good time up there at State College. It looked like a lot of fun seeing a lot of really solid prospects play, especially the Penn State commits. Those guys look really good out there.
It's always nice when these regional camp circuits find their way right into town. The second straight year we've had the Elite 11 regional here in State College. And again, it wrapped up their regional circuit. They actually are locked in now for their Elite 11 finals out in Los Angeles next month. We will not see Beckham Kitza as one of those 20 finalists. It breaks a little bit of a streak in terms of a Penn State commit being present in those Elite 11 finals. Guys like Drew Aller, Jackson Smolik, Ethan Grunkemeyer were part of that process, reached the finals out in Los Angeles. This is an event I've talked about on the podcast several times over the years, where before I was covering Penn State specifically, I got to go to Elite 11 camps across the country. I was kind of on that Elite 11 beat all the way through the finals. It is a really, really interesting process, and what you see them kind of poke and prod the quarterbacks with. And I was really curious what we'd see from Beckham Kitza, who's kind of the mystery man in this entire quarterback class. I mean, Andrew Ivins, who is our national scouting director at 24/7 Sports, was here in Happy Valley for this camp, and he's repeatedly referred to Kitza as the nomad of the 2024 or 2025 quarterback class. Remember, starting his career in Colorado, ending up in Southern California, South Florida, coming back to Colorado to play 6 games last year due to some transfer issues. And because of that, we're looking at a situation where even if he were to play an entire senior season back at Miami Central this season, we're going to have probably 15, 16, fewer than 20 career high school starts to base off of. So any look is important. And Daniel, we'll bring in Tyler Calvaruso in a moment because I know he's covered Kitza closer than each of us throughout his recruitment process. But let's talk about what we saw in front of us. I think the tools are there. I understand why he didn't make that cut to be an Elite 11 finalist. I understand why he doesn't carry a high ranking right now at 24/7 Sports. But in talking about the pieces and the projection, and that's what we're doing a lot of here without a guy who has a back history of a bunch of starts at the high school level, you can understand what Andy Kotelnicki, James Franklin, and company are envisioning down the line.
Yeah, I think Mark Brennan kind of laid it out the best when we were talking kind of after we were, decompressing and going through everything that we saw. And, Mark kind of said that, like, it's sort of like, okay, like we get it now. The biggest thing with Beckham Kitza is that he hasn't played a lot of games, so we haven't really had a chance to get eyes on him. And so to get eyes on him in person, even though it was in that camp setting, I thought was very informative and very helpful for us. I mean, I think you're right. I think that you can see why he doesn't necessarily have that high ranking. You can see why that there are question marks about him, but I think that you can see that upside. I mean, he is a really, really big kid, 6'5". I think he told you he's up to nearly 200 pounds. We saw him show off a little bit of athleticism when the quarterbacks had to do a little bit of receiving on a couple of the drills. But you saw the arm strength. You could see how he could move. There are some quarterbacks there who were better, and it was a really talented group. A lot of Power 4 talent there. But I think with Kitza, you can see the upside. You can kind of see where things are pointing. So I came away, kind of like what Mark said, where it was very much like, okay, like you can kind of see it. You can kind of see what Penn State sees in him. You can kind of see that upside. You can maybe make a little bit of the projection trajectory going forward.
I mean, you just don't see a lot of prospects at any position that look that wiry at this stage of their career, coming up on their senior year of high school. And at the quarterback spot, you see that frame to fill out, but your natural inclination is to say, how does this body hold up against Big Ten defenders? If you get your opportunity and you're taking shots in the backfield or as a scrambler, as a runner, as an athlete, can he hold up? Is that durability there? And it was really encouraging, I think, for as much as we saw his body of work through the drills and through some of the different stuff that the Elite 11 staff threw his way. And oh, by the way, on this particular day, the instructors for the Elite 11 included a familiar face, Mike Yursich, the former offensive coordinator for Penn State, former quarterbacks coach for Penn State, who was here on campus when Kitza picked up the offer and was fired less than 48 hours before Kitza announced his commitment to the program. We saw Mike Yursich, after all, working closely with Beckham Kitza during Sunday afternoon's event in State College. It was a little surreal to see that. But I think in speaking with Kitza afterwards for about 10 minutes, and we have that full video up at Lions247.com, it was really my first chance, aside from exchanging some messages here and there with him, to learn a little bit more about him. He's an interesting case study right now in modern high school athletics with guys transferring all over the place. And he discussed the motivation to return to Colorado. It's something that was out there already, but he talked about a family illness, dealing with something. His aunt needed some help. So his family was relocated to Colorado. It was a familiar area for him in the Boulder area. That's where he started his high school career. Because of those issues, though, this is a guy who was entering last season at Miami Central, a team that's often carrying a top 25 ranking nationally at the high school level, and ends up finishing the season after missing games due to transfer in a public school in Colorado. Very different circumstances. And he says now that he's back at Miami Central in that spotlight, he feels like he wants to go out and prove he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And I'm probably shortchanging him. I believe he said he wants to prove he is the best quarterback in the country. And that's a big statement for the guy who I think is outside the top 35 or 40 quarterbacks right now in rankings. But Kitza has been on the radar since his earliest days of high school. That frame has something to do with it. But the live arm was very real. I mean, that arm measured up against anybody that I think we saw. Ryan Montgomery was really good all day. I know he was dealing with turf toe, but the Georgia commit was impressive. He picked up an invitation to the Elite 11 finals. So did Matt Zollers, the in-state Pennsylvania quarterback who's committed to Missouri. Penn State still involved there. We'll keep tabs. But it was a group that featured some serious talent and a Clemson commit. And you saw Kitza when they started to get into some of the pocket mobility work where you were allowing quarterbacks to be a little bit more improvisational and a little bit more free with their release and kind of with their movements versus stationary in the pocket and really having to think through the coaching. Tyler, that's when we saw Kitza play his best. And so I'm wondering if that matches with the skill set, the prospect profile that you've heard from Lash, and what you make of what you've seen from the highlight videos that we posted up, the interview that we posted from Kitza, and additionally just kind of what you've gathered in speaking with folks in Penn State facilities about this young quarterback.
Yeah, I think those drills kind of play to his strengths in a sense because he is a good athlete and he is good, moving around, getting out of the pocket, making throws on the run, making throws across his body. It's something that he's pretty adept at, which, might, for some people, might come as a surprise because there, quite frankly, are some things he still needs to clean up mechanically. So to see a guy, go around and make throws on the run at the level he was doing, it's kind of encouraging because there is still things that need to be tapped into and things that need to be fixed. And he's already making some throws that other guys aren't. So that's encouraging. It definitely fits with the overall evaluation. One of the reasons why Penn State wanted to bring him on board. I think you guys have really touched on every bullet point. to be honest. I think that the staff feels he has the tools that could be developed. It's a matter of getting him to where he needs to be in his development. The key is going to be playing football for him. Like that's really just what it is. He needs to be on the field consistently as a senior. He's probably played less football than a large majority of quarterbacks in his class. I think that's a pretty safe assumption. I don't want to say it's concerning, but it's something that he just needs that in-game experience, especially being at Miami Center, back at Miami Central now. He's going to be playing high-level defenses. He's going to be playing high-level competition where, he's kind of going to be thrown into the fire, and he's going to have to make plays if Miami Central wants to win games in 2024. So that's what I'm going to be keeping a really close eye on throughout his senior year. But again, Penn State took him for a reason, right? They didn't just welcome him on board without any sort of plan for his development or any sort of plan to get him to the next level and take his game to the next level. He has traits, he has skills, he has tools. All of those could be developed. I think you guys got the chance to see those over the weekend. And at the end of the day, it's going to be on Danny O'Brien to bring the best out of him. Another thing I wanted to note is, with all the mobility that Kitza showed on Sunday, Andy Kotelnicki, it kind of works out in a sense because we've seen him run offenses where he likes to get the quarterback out of the pocket and move him around and get him into space and make throws from outside of the pocket. If that's something Kitza can do consistently as a college quarterback, it's going to help him specifically in the offense and the offensive coordinator that he's playing for.
Kitza told us that he was about 180 last year as a high school junior during his season at Fairview High School in Boulder, Colorado. He reported he's now about 198, closing up the spring here, heading into the summer. So he's in good spot to be over 200 pounds come his first snap of his senior season. And just to give folks a quick summary of where he's been at and what he's done at the high school level, because he is really a unique story here. Started his career at the aforementioned Fairview High School in Boulder, Colorado, had a really nice freshman year, kind of solidified some of those early rumblings about his recruitment. He goes out to Santa Margarita Catholic in Orange County, California. I lived about 5 minutes away from that school, and I can tell you it is always a revolving door of Power 5 talent and Power 5 recruiters coming through. He was the backup there behind Jackson Porter, a guy who went on to sign with Washington State in the Pac-12. He threw 35 passes as a sophomore as that backup. Then he goes to Miami Central in 2023. Again, this is a primetime school. They end up playing Bishop Gorman out of Las Vegas, and he gets in for a late Hail Mary throw as a backup quarterback, and all of a sudden he resurfaces weeks later on the public fields of Boulder, Colorado, playing ball again at Fairview. So just a lot of I think nomad's a good word for it. Now that he's got some stability, we hope for the year ahead, leading up to his January enrollment at Penn State, there's going to be a lot of eyes on this guy. So I've said it before, if he flourishes, I think our rankings council is going to reflect that. I think that you're going to see the feedback that warrants. And if he struggles in that spotlight facing high-level competition, then there's understandably going to be, maybe some cold water thrown on this commitment as he prepares to come to Penn State. And I think with that in mind, we don't know which way it will go. And I encourage everyone to check out the Kitza highlights and interview at Lions247.com. But is the possibility remaining in play, Tyler, for a 2-quarterback class? We saw a couple guys that have been part of that conversation on the Elite 11 field working right next to him. In fact, they were going 1, 2, 3 in order. It was Matt Zollers, the in-state quarterback who's off to Missouri as of now. It was Malik Washington, the Maryland quarterback, who's been up to Penn State a bunch, and it just didn't quite materialize for Penn State to pounce on him, and he's looking elsewhere now. And then you've got the lone man standing in the class in Beckham Kitza.
It is, but it's going to come down to Matt Zollers and whether or not he wants to flip that commitment from Missouri to Penn State. That's really the only way it's going to be a 2-quarterback class at this point. At least that's the way it seems right now here at the end of May. I think that they're going to continue to chip away at Zollers, and whatever happens there, and Kitza is going to be in the class. So I'm leaning more towards it being a 1-quarterback class at the end of the day because I don't really see Zollers moving off his Missouri commitment. He seems pretty solid with the SEC program. But if it's going to be a 2-quarterback class, it's going to be Zollers in it. I don't see another guy surfacing late. The Malik Washington ship has sailed. It's kind of been that way for a little while now. So it would have to be Zollers because they're not really going out and evaluating 25s at this point. There's been a lot of focus on that 26 quarterback recruiting class, which is shaping up to be pretty good. So I think right now, if I had to make a prediction, it's going to be a 1-quarterback class with Kitza. 2 does remain a possibility, but it would have to be Zollers.
We will get to one of those top 2026 quarterback targets for Penn State in just a little while because he was also in town for that Elite 11 camp. I just want to mention this. Anna Adams Sue does a great job on the national recruiting scene for 247 Sports. She also joined us in State College on Sunday, and she caught up with Zollers a little bit. And apparently, Penn State would have loved to have him come through team facilities this past weekend when he was on campus. Obviously, all the commits did. A lot of the targets were able to spend some time at team facilities while balancing the camp last weekend. Zollers told Anna Adams he was busy, so it wasn't something that came through. So read into that what you will, but for right now, maybe not quite as receptive to a flip as you may imagine. But we got a while to go until signing day, and he's going to remain a name on that radar. Daniel, we saw in terms of pass targets a really nice collection to kind of evaluate on our behalf covering Penn State, because you had 2 commits from the 2025 class working at tight end. You had another priority target for Penn State working at tight end, and a wide receiver commit in Lyric Samuel. So I think we'll start with the tight end cluster, because that was where our eyes were drawn pretty quickly because of that group and the guys involved there. And let's begin with the commits. Matt Henderson, it was our first look at him, the guy who put up phenomenal stats last year as a wide receiver, over 1,000 receiving yards. He's a 1,000-point scorer on the basketball court. Everything you hear about him is the athleticism, the ceiling with this guy. And so we got to see him work. And then Brady O'Hara is kind of at the opposite end of the pendulum, where you've got Henderson at 207 pounds, moving from wide receiver to tight end in college. You've got Brady O'Hara at 6'6", 250 plus pounds at this point. Be playing tight end this season. He's played tight end in the past. He's ranked as a tight end at 247 Sports. But as we've discussed time and time again, when his name is brought up, his trajectory may be veering towards the offensive line at the college level. Daniel, you caught up with O'Hara. You had eyes on Henderson. Why don't you kick off our conversation at tight end?
Yeah, I'll start with Henderson, because he was someone who I was really curious to see in action. He was someone that I was on vacation for a couple weeks there, but his recruitment snuck up on me a little bit, and so I was really curious to get eyes on him. And you're right, you could see that athleticism. Obviously, there's some physical development that would need to happen before he could get onto the field at Penn State, but I think that in terms of looking at him, you can see the traits that are there. I thought he moved really well. I think that he had good hands. I came away impressed with him as a first impression. I'll be really interested to see what happens over this next season, how he continues to develop. But the way that Penn State has its tight end room stacked up for these next couple of years, that's a position group that you can walk into and you don't necessarily need to contribute right away, and you'll have the opportunity to physically develop. And we know what Penn State's track record is with physically developing players, especially at that position over the past couple of years. So I thought Henderson was pretty entertaining to watch. That was a good introduction to him. As for O'Hara, I think that you can kind of see him trending towards the offensive line just with how big he is. He was there early and was working as an offensive lineman first thing in the morning, and then he spends the rest of the day catching passes. It was not a very deep group of pass catchers, so he got a lot of work.
It was a marathon, man. I would put this out. Lyric Samuel is about as in shape as you'll find a high school athlete out there. He's like 6'4", 180 pounds, no ounce of fat. He was bent over at the waist toward the tail end of this camp, because they just had these dudes running routes. Credit to them for helping the quarterbacks, but they probably could have used maybe another 10 to 15 pass targets.
I know. I thought they were going to ask you to get out there. By the end of it, their receivers are lining. They're starting their routes 20 yards up the field, so they only have to run 15 yards instead of 35 yards at a time. But in terms of talking to O'Hara afterwards, he seemed he was very open. He said that wherever he needs to be at the next level, that's where he's going to play. He said that if they want him to play offensive line instead of tight end, that's fine with him. That's kind of the way that he's approaching things. It was an interesting conversation. I still have to write it up on Lions247, but he showed a lot of some self-awareness. I know that there was a clip of him from the Under Armour camp in New Jersey that was going around on the internet. He brought that up to me. I didn't ask him about it, and he said that.
I think good reasons, in case you're not aware of it. It was a clip of him running the route at tight end, and people didn't seem to think he looked like a Penn State tight end commit.
Yeah, it was a Rivals camp actually, but still, it went viral. Yeah, some NFL players chimed in too.
Oh wow. Well, he said that I think I asked him, what he wanted to show at the camp on Sunday, and he said that he wanted to show that he's someone who doesn't really give up, someone who doesn't go away. He brought that clip up, and he said that that's not something that he's going to hide from. He said that it was kind of a learning experience of being in the spotlight and dealing with that kind of scrutiny, but he said that he had some really good support from the people that were around him. I came away, thinking that it was someone who was pretty mature. He had a good sense of humor. I think that when me and Tyler were walking over to the tight ends after they were done, he was like, why do you guys want to talk to me? You guys should talk to Andrew Olish. That's the guy you guys are here to see. I think that where he goes physically is going to be interesting to see. From that respect, I mean, you can see he's really big. He's not necessarily, your prototypical tight end with the way that he moves and whatnot. But we'll see where nature takes him and how that development comes along.
I feel like Brady O'Hara was meant to play tight end in like the late 80s, early 90s. Before that, I mean, the positions evolved, especially when you talk about the programs at Penn State's level and what we witnessed ourselves here from the position, the kind of athleticism and versatility required from someone who's going to fill that role. And I know when we talk about Matt Henderson, he has so much to prove from everything beyond the perimeter. This guy's got to show up as a blocker. He's got to know what to do at every component of the position. With Brady O'Hara, you just wonder, watching him work down the field, will his athleticism allow him to work his way open at tight end consistently at the college level, on the practice field and then into game days? And I think that when you project him at this level here on this campus and that position room, I don't think it's a very strong fit. I don't think it's necessarily a huge boost for that tight end room. I don't know if it's a huge boost for Brady O'Hara's long-term football ambitions. Now, I think there's a lot of programs that could utilize him as a tight end, maybe a more traditional role as we used to think of it, where you look at his highlights, and unlike Matt Henderson, who's streaking down the field and running a bunch of routes, a lot of Brady O'Hara's highlights are him, getting dirty in the trenches, being a lead blocker. That's kind of the bread and butter for him. Yes, he had some moments in the passing game. He had some really impressive moments in the passing game, but trying to translate to the Power 5 and now Power 4 level, I suppose I should start calling it. It's just a little bit tricky to see how that translates. And then I would love to see him play some offensive tackle. I know he made a really good point to you, Daniel, and I included the quote in the highlights that we posted. We have a dual highlights up at Lions247 of both Henderson and O'Hara, so you can kind of compare and contrast two very different players right now. But the point that O'Hara made was, look, I'm in 2024. I'm trying to chase everything I can as a high school senior. My role is a tight end for my high school team. My coaches see me as a tight end, and that's where I have to focus going to camps if I want to improve. And of course, our job is to not say, well, what are you going to do as a high school senior? Our job is to say, well, what are you going to do as a Nittany Lion? And so it's a little trickier for us to kind of wrap our heads around Brady O'Hara. And you mentioned he was kind of over there with the offensive line drills, but we got, maybe 20 reps of one-on-one work from a small group of linemen. And he was an observer for those. We didn't see him, put it out on the line and try to go up against an edge rusher or anything like that. I do wonder what happens as we get into Penn State's camp season, because we're on the cusp of it. It's going to start as June arrives, and then we're going to be on the field a bunch in June, seeing Penn State commits come through. Is O'Hara a guy who, comes to camp a bunch and works exclusively with Ty Howell, or is it a kind of a shared custody between Howell and Troutwine, or are there going to be moments where the afternoon is entirely spent with Troutwine and Frank Leonard? Because I know for as much as Penn State wants to set him up for success as a senior and do everything they can to help him have a great finish to his high school career, Tyler Calvaruso, the point is they need to bring in someone that they feel can contribute and push them closer to their ultimate goals. And I think we're still trying to figure out how Brady O'Hara does that within this class.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, Penn State's priority is, one, to find the best fit for its own needs, and two, to put the kid in the best position to succeed. I think, given the fact that all of the conversations that I've had centered around him likely being a tackle at the next level, maybe you do see some of that during summer camp season. I think with the way this one's playing out, I wouldn't put a ton of stock into where he plays during camp season. I think, he probably, if I had to guess, I have no idea right now, because that's something that's right around the corner. And frankly, I haven't really asked what's going to be coming about with him in camp season. I think you might see a little bit of both. I think you could see one camp where he works at tight end, one camp where he works on the O-line. We're just going to have to get eyes on that ourselves and go from there. I also want to note that he has played tackle at the high school level. He did it a little bit last year. Now, still primarily a tight end, but I think his high school staff, they wanted to give him a little bit of work at tackle. And I think, that wasn't necessarily an extended run. He wasn't out there playing 80 snaps a game at tackle, but I think it'll help him if that is indeed where he lands at the next level. Because if he gets to Penn State and is asked to play tackle, he'll be doing something that he's at least done before. Yeah. He's not going to be going doing something where he has zero level of experience. So I think that's worth noting. But if you look at the traits, you look at the skill set, I do think tackle, me and you, Ty, we even discussed it, maybe even on the interior at some point, if his length doesn't check out at tackle, that's something that you need to consider. So I think he's one of the more interesting prospects in the class, given the conversation that we're having. He's one of a few guys who have a little bit of positional versatility. Deshaun Burnett from Pittsburgh on the defensive side. Is he a linebacker at the next level? Is he an edge rusher at the next level? So this is a conversation that we have had with multiple guys in this class. I think with O'Hara specifically, I think the big thing with him is no matter where he plays at the next level, it's something that he wants to do. He's not going to have an issue with being moved around to another position if that's what comes about. He's going to put his head down. He's going to work at whatever the Penn State coaching staff asks him to do. In previous years, we haven't quite seen that from guys who made position changes when they got on campus. So that's encouraging. I think Penn State likes Brady O'Hara, the kid. I think they like the upside and with his, just his size, his athleticism. So we're going to have to see what happens when he gets to campus. But I still can't shake the notion that it's going to be tackle for him at the next level.
Yeah, and we know that they just added a tackle who was under 260 pounds when he arrived at Egan Boyer. So they're willing to do these projects. Though Boyer is 6'8" with incredible length. I do wonder about that length a little bit, even with that 6'6" stature for O'Hara. But really a great kid to talk about. I think you're right, Daniel. Very self-aware of kind of what his process looks right now, projecting onto the college level. And one note on Henderson, competed last season right around 195. He's now checking in at 207. He told us he hopes to get to campus, and that won't happen until next May at 220. He's trying to continue bulking up the right way progressively, but he's made strides in that department. He wants to stick around, finish his basketball career. That's really the motivation for not enrolling early. Again, 1,000-point scorer on the hardwoods through 3 years. But guys, we got to be honest, all due respect, tip of the cap to those guys for the work they put in, and even Lyric Samuel. But I felt like the best non-quarterback performance of the day, and maybe if you include quarterbacks based on the sample size we just got in front of us, was Andrew Olish, the in-state tight end prospect that a lot of schools are circling around. He's got 4 official visits set up for consecutive weeks. Penn State is among them. So is Alabama. So is Michigan. So is Florida. Schools like Ole Miss and Missouri still maybe on the fringe there in the conversation. But Daniel, we got a long look at him. Again, the routes were plentiful for these guys. We've got a highlight package that people can view at Lions247.com. And it wasn't a mistake that within 3 days when that top 24/7 was updated, that Olish was among the major risers. He's into the top 100 overall now. The Pennsylvania tight end really showed up and proved what he's about.
Yeah, I thought Olish was the best out of that tight end group, and probably the best, like you said, of the pass catchers. I mean, we got to look at him a lot, but you just see the size, the movement, the hands. Grace Brennan has a great shot of him making a catch on a ball out in front of him. That was pretty impressive. And yeah, I just came away really impressed with him. I mean, for me, that's my first time really seeing him in person, outside of, a couple highlights here or there, but, he looks the part. I think that when you think about the other tight ends that we've seen camp and we've seen Penn State bring in over the past couple of cycles, you see how he fits into what Ty Howe is looking for, and what he can do at that next level. So yeah, I'll be curious to see how things play out with Olish. But when I saw him jump in the rankings, it was very much like, yeah, that makes total sense based on what we saw on Sunday in State College.
I don't think it was quite Luke Reynolds' 2023 Elite 11 camp, which, I mean, helped him work his way toward that 5-star status and number 1 tight end in the country. But Olish is up to the number 4 tight end in the country. I believe he was like number 12 going into the camp. And so he is certainly a guy who could vibe as the top tight end as he gets more camp looks and has a senior season ahead of him at Southern Lehigh High School. And Mr. Calvaruso, we have been bringing up his name time and time again at tight end. Early on when we brought it up, it felt like a foregone conclusion. Sure, he's going to end up in the class. It's Penn State. It's a tight end room. It's an in-state prospect. This is going to happen. And then plenty of other programs found out about this guy. The Sharks started circling him, and he's had a lot of options to consider. He's been on the road before, and he told us he's going to use these 4 official visits to do his research, get a feel, and try to come out of this process in late June with a decision ready to deliver. And right now, he got to spend more time at Penn State. He was heading over to team facilities with Brady O'Hara immediately after this camp. I don't think there is a lot of sense that Penn State needs to build up much more than relationships right now, because he's got a really good feel for that program. But the Michigans and Alabamas of the world, they are putting up a big fight here. And I think Penn State enters this stretch run of his recruitment not in the driver's seat in any way. I mean, I think they may be sharing the front row of the car with a couple other teams, but this one has developed in a way that, to Andrew Olish's credit, has made it a national conversation.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's in the driver's seat at this point. I think these official visits are going to be huge for him, and that's something he's been pretty consistent in saying since the beginning of his recruitment, going back to the winter when Penn State offered and he really started to blow up. He was pretty clear that when it comes time for him to make a decision, getting out and taking these official visits and learning about things in depth as much as he can, it was going to be key for him in the decision-making process. Penn State's done a good job with Olish. I mean, his relationship with tight ends coach Ty Howell, it's where it needs to be. It's probably the best of any assistant, player relationship Olish has in his recruitment. But I think that, again, with the officials keeping in mind that they're going to be huge for him, I think Bama and Michigan are they're right there, especially Michigan. I've heard a lot of positive buzz surrounding Michigan recently.
We heard positive buzz. Let's put it out there. Mom liked Michigan a lot. Anna Adams caught up with the parents at this camp, and Mom certainly seemed to like Michigan and the possibility of that being the pick. Just put it out there, because the more intel we have on the situation, we might as well share it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously his parents have a pretty important part to play in all of this. He's close with them, and he's going to listen to their input and value that however he feels that he needs to value it. That's part of the equation as well. But even outside of that, Michigan's been generating a lot of buzz. Bama, the SEC has been such a common theme in this recruitment for him. So many SEC programs jumped in. I mean, Florida's going to get an official too. I know they haven't really come up as much as some of the other programs, but they're in the hunt. But Bama, Michigan, Penn State, I think right now that's like the top 3. I know he has a top 4, the official said, but I think really it's those 3 it's going to come down to. Right now, it's too close to call right now. I think I got to go back to the way I started this. I don't think anyone's in the driver's seat before these official visits. But if I'm a Penn State fan, if there's another program that I need to keep a really close eye on with Olish right now, it's Michigan.
Yeah, what we've heard is that the ability for maybe some other schools to sell the early playing time, maybe a little more convincingly. We all are high on Andrew Rapplier. He's a redshirt freshman, and he's not the only guy vying for reps. By the way, the 5-star just got to campus in January. Luke Reynolds, he's also around town now for the foreseeable future. So you can understand why maybe this depth chart, this room might not look like the clearest path to making an impact as a freshman. But I want to balance it out, because I mentioned Mom's high on Michigan. Dad's a Penn State grad. So we'll just put that on the table as well for our listeners. But a lot to follow in the Andrew Olish recruitment, maybe the most important one, perhaps across either side of the ball, but I would imagine certainly on offense right now as we focus in on 2025 and what they've done at the position. I know the NFL track record for them and what they've done through those recent drafts is also weighing heavily on Olish's mind, him and his parents high on that aspect of the Nittany Lions. And they've been around this program for about a year now, going back to last year's camps, and that relationship is a little bit longer than some of the others. Lyric Samuel was the other pass target in Penn State's 2025 class that we got eyes on. Tyler, we'll get you in a second, because I know you're just a few weeks removed from seeing him over in New Jersey. The Brooklyn product was out there, and he just pops before you start doing anything. These guys show up to the fields to start walking around, and when you're 6'4", 180 pounds, you stand out. And Lyric Samuel has all the length you'd like, and he matches it with field stretching speed. And you understand why I think it was about 25 yards per catch last year as a junior. He scored a touchdown like once every 2.5 catches last year. So he's a big play waiting to happen. I think Beckham Kitza referred to him as a highlight reel when we spoke after camp. He was another guy who was gassed by the end of the day Sunday. But when he was at his best, Daniel, what did you see from Penn State's only receiver commitment in this 2025 class so far?
I think when you look at someone with a frame like Lyric Samuels, nearly 6'4", 180 pounds, you kind of wonder about the short area quickness a little bit and that agility. I thought that I came away, impressed with that. I thought that it was not like better than I thought it would be, but watching him, it was kind of like, okay, like he's smooth. He's getting in and out of breaks. Like you can kind of see it. There was another wide receiver there at the similar frame, PJ Holmes, an in-state guy with some FCS and low-level FBS offers, similar frame, and you can kind of see the difference, between a Lyric Samuel, a power 4 prospect, and then a lower level prospect with how Lyric Samuel was moving. He had one rep that I wrote about where he slipped early in it, then tripped over a cone when making his break, and while he was stumbling, but he's so long, he was still able to extend and haul that ball in. I thought that was really impressive. He's just such a smooth straight line guy. You could kind of tell in some of the later reps that he was conserving his energy a little bit, but he's so long and his stride is so long that he was still able to cover a lot of ground and make things look easy. So I think that was just my biggest takeaway from getting eyes on him in person, is that things just looked easy for him. The speed was there. He was able to just kind of blow by some guys. He had a couple of reps against Larry Moon where he looked really good. So I came away really impressed with Lyric Samuel. I mean, you look at him, he's really skinny, and you think about that at the next level, probably needs to bulk up a little bit. There's some work to do there, but you can kind of see what Penn State has to work with Lyric Samuel.
Yeah, we'll get to Larry Moon in a moment. Really impressive 2027 prospect in the state of Pennsylvania at the cornerback spot. But I think with Samuel, you make a really good point, Daniel. And when you see the measurements and you show up to the camp field, you wonder, is the guy going to look like he's wearing roller skates when it's time to cut in and out of breaks? Because sometimes, you get beyond 6'2", you're talking about 16, 17-year-olds. That coordination could take a little while to click, or it never does. And you just bring in a project at wide receiver who never quite is fluid enough to get on the field and contribute for you. But I thought the fluidity was there for the most part. I'd like to see him. I think we'll get to see it. I'm excited for it when Higgins gets him. I'd like to see him really have to attack a full route tree. I think he's a guy who can get by on a lot of the physical intangibles on the high school football field and on a camp field and just win with those. What does it look like when there's a little more nuance involved? And Marcus Higgins is trying to drill into his head a little bit. I hope that we have multiple opportunities. I think we'll get at least one of those come camp season here in Happy Valley. And Tyler, just bringing you in here a little bit quickly to finish up on Lyric Samuel. He's the only receiver on board, and we know how much this room needs new names, new risers, new splashy players. What do you think about Lyric Samuels? He's a guy who's right now profiling as a 3-star at 247 Sports. Do you see him as the kind of player who can show up and make an impact at Penn State, be a playmaker? Because a lot of those traits that we see, they work so well at the high school level, but you can't rely on the physical mismatches when you're playing Big Ten ball.
You could stand to add some upper body mass and develop as a route runner and develop some other aspects of his game, but I see it long-term with him. I think I got eyes on him, like you mentioned, at Under Armour, New Jersey, and he looks the part. Physically, the upside, it's pretty impossible to miss. I mean, the size is impressive, the height-wise, catch radius is there with that in mind, and I think, once he adds just a little bit more strength, I think he'll be good to go in that wide receiver room. I like him as more than a 3-star prospect. I think his upside is I think it should take him a little bit higher than that. In Jersey, I mean, he struggled to catch the ball at times, but it's also pouring rain, and everyone was struggling to catch the ball. So I'm not going to hold that against him. But everywhere else, he looked good. The fluidity was very much there. You could see that during one-on-ones when he was going through the gauntlet. Some guys, when they go through the gauntlet, when they're younger in high school, they kind of take their time in between catches. There's a little bit of a hitch or there's a little bit of a stop. He kept going. He was smooth all the way through the gauntlet. And that's notable because that's something that I saw out of a few guys at Under Armour Baltimore, and they turned out to be high-level guys. No coincidence there, right? Samuel was doing the same exact thing. I think if you go look at his junior year film, it's very clear that he's going to be able to get the job done as a deep threat. I don't think there's any debate on that. It's all the other stuff. You mentioned it, the expanded route tree. How's he going to be when being asked to run different variants of routes? I think he'll be able to get there, and I think physically he'll be able to get there. It's going to come down to the development. It's going to come down to the work that he puts in with Marcus Higgins and where that takes him. I like his future, though. I think he's got a pretty bright future in State College. And when it comes to starting the receiver class, because Penn State is just looking to stockpile quality talent at the position. Your first commit being Lyric Samuel, it's a pretty good place to start.
That commitment came back in February. Last season, 27 catches for 693 yards. That's right around 25.7 per grab, 11 touchdowns. He told us he wants to go for 1,000 yards here as a senior. He's planning a January enrollment as well. So a guy that'll be on board for next spring ball. Let's keep it rolling. We spent a lot of time on these commits. We know Olish is a priority target, but we're going to go a little bit quicker through some more names, and we're going to start at the receiver position. And just ahead of official visits, a lot of these guys, a repeated theme is, they are coming to campus within the next few weeks, and it's pretty important because the decision is probably coming fairly soon after that. And let's begin with another wide receiver down at the McDonough School. We know all about that program. We'll talk about that more in a moment. In Maryland, Jeff Exner, he was at the Baltimore camp you just saw. Tell us about the prospect. Tell us about the recruitment.
Now, he ran the 40 in the 4.6 range, which I think is pretty impressive given he's 6'2", 220. I think he wants to play a little bit lighter at the next level. I think he wants to go more around 210 and a little bit more speed, but prospect profile, it's a high level one. You know, he had some really good reps during one-on-ones. He looked good going through drill work, so I can see why he's as high on the Penn State board as he is. And when it comes to his recruitment, he's kind of getting down into the thick of things here. He's already taken an official visit to Virginia Tech. That occurred in April. He's got Michigan State during the first weekend of June, and then he's got Penn State June 7th and through the 9th. He told me he wants to come into a decision during those first 2 weeks of June at some point. He has Maryland and Syracuse scheduled beyond that, but if he sticks to that timeline, it's not looking like those visits are going to occur. So you can kind of do the math on which schools are really garnering the majority of his consideration right now. Penn State, I mean, he's been around a ton. The relationships are pretty well built at this point. Exner has known Kenny Sanders since long before he was a recruit of any level, let alone a high level one. You know, those two go back as family friends. So that's a comfortable and familiar face that he already has in State College if he were to play for Penn State. And I think that's big for him, knowing that he has that in place. He has a good relationship with Marcus Higgins. He has a good relationship with James Franklin. He likes what Higgins has been telling him in terms of his pitch on the development front, how they're going to be able to get Exner take his game up a notch. The one school I don't want to discount here is Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech got Exner on campus for that official visit in April, and it went really, really, really well. You know, the Hokies did a great job with him during their spring game, and they're getting a really long look here. Michigan State's a little bit newer, you know, just given the new staff had to jump in and offer, but he seems pretty intrigued with that group in East Lansing. But for me, it feels like a Virginia Tech-Penn State battle. I'm not sure which way it's going to go at this point, because I think Virginia Tech gave him a lot to think about that maybe he didn't have on his mind previously. So don't sleep on the Hokies on this one, but Penn State's going to have its chance to sway Exner when he gets him on campus for the official visit. And, you know, we've seen it where Penn State gets a guy up who's been around a bunch, they get him on the official, and that's enough to seal the deal. The hope is that occurs here.
That school, McDonough, down in Maryland, has been very kind to Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Kenny Sanders and his relationships there. Well, he's an alum of that program and of that school, and he's somebody who has been a tremendous asset to this recruiting department under James Franklin. And during this time, you've had players come through and start like Curtis Jacobs, Devon Elise, PJ Mustafer. It's a long list. Dennis Sutton, a rising star now out of that program. You've got another young prospect in Mason Robinson, who's a redshirt freshman. And another name in this very same recruiting class in 2025 is very much on the radar, top 24/7 cornerback, and Brandon Finney, and another player that you caught up with down in Baltimore.
Sorry, I had to mute myself there for a second.
Don't do that to yourself.
Weird stuff going on outside right now. But no, Finney, I got the chance to catch up with him in person for the first time, and just seeing him throughout camp, it was really an eye-opening experience, at least for me. I mean, I guess our rankings committee too, because he's a top 24/7 prospect now, as he should be. I think that his speed, first off, is legit. His track times, they translate to the gridiron. There's no doubt about that. So he's going to be a legit guy in that respect at the next level. In coverage, he's strong. He's very fluid. He flips his hips well. There's nothing stiff about Brandon Finney, I can tell you that. He's a very fluid cornerback, and that's something I think Terry Smith and every other coach who's after him really appreciates. His recruitment, it's probably, it's not tough to read, but it's in an interesting spot because you need to take into account his timeline here. Penn State offered in December. That was kind of the start of it for him, where more Power 4 schools came calling. January, February, he officially blew up at that point. And he had already made it back to Penn State for a visit by then. He attended a junior day in early January. So the Nittany Lions are already, kind of laying the foundation here for successful recruitment. But, programs like Georgia and Oregon, they're involved and they're high on his list, but they're still kind of new to him in a sense. He still needs to get out there for these official visits and learn what they're about, because his recruitment hasn't been some long-standing national process. It's been on an accelerated timeline because his blow-up came a little bit later in his recruitment. So I think that's a very interesting element to keep in mind entering official visits, because he's going to get to Penn State. The one visit that he has locked in right now is Penn State during the weekend of June 7th through the 9th. The rest of it he's kind of reshuffling for, I'm not sure what reason, but he said some of the dates kind of got messed up and he had to do some work to get his schedule back into place. That's ongoing right now. But Georgia's in the mix. Oregon's in the mix. South Carolina's in the mix. Michigan is working its way into the equation. I think the Wolverines are a wild card there now. Syracuse is kind of hanging around, but the odds of them getting an official visit from Finney, I don't think that's going to happen. But Penn State, I think its pitch has been pretty solid to him. It's something that he has appreciated. Terry Smith not only laying out how he's going to develop them, but pointing to previous examples and pointing to guys like Joey Porter and saying, hey, look, this is what I did for him. There are similarities between the two of you, so I could kind of follow that same blueprint and fine-tune it as we go along to your game to make sure that we get the most out of you and we get to the NFL one day. I think that's something that has really kind of resonated with him throughout his involvement with Penn State. And the other thing that has resonated is Terry Smith took a chance on Finney before a lot of other Power 4 programs. Penn State was involved before the blow-up occurred. And that's something that has meant a lot to him, really, from the start.
Daniel, I know that we've got some things to discuss. Dia Bell among them, the top quarterback. But is it okay if we just let Cal Russo cook for a little while longer on the Baltimore camp and you stand to the side?
Oh, of course. I'll do my best AJ Hawk impression.
Damn.
I like that.
All right. Well, wasn't expecting that. But Tyler, as we look ahead, a few more defensive linemen to get into. And by the way, we'll see if that McDonough momentum builds into another recruiting class and into another signing day. A couple key names to know there in Finney and Exeter. But on the defensive line, Cortez Harris, Ivan Kamaju, the new offer who got MVP of the defensive lineman down in Baltimore, Christian Evans. I'm giving you a package deal here with this one because it seemed like that was an area of strength, especially when we're viewing it from a Penn State prism in that Baltimore camp setting. What did you make of those three names, and what do we need to know about the newest guy? I know Jaywan Sider paid him a visit. Christian Evans out of Virginia.
Yeah, looking back at like the one-on-ones and the drill work, the O-line, D-line, there were a lot of good receivers and corners, but O-line, D-line, man, that was a really impressive group. That was fun to watch throughout the day. And there were a bunch of guys Penn State is involved with taking part in that. So, being able to focus on that, it definitely lended me a lot of valuable insight into, what Cortez Harris might be at the next level, what Yvonne Camacho might be at the next level. Christian Evans kind of popped onto my radar more and more throughout the day. Penn State had been monitoring him up until this point. So this wasn't some, new, this guy blew up. Let's see what we have here because he won defensive line MVP. He had been on the radar, especially him being from Virginia. So they're already familiar with him to some degree. But they got eyes on that Under Armour Baltimore performance, and that led to an offer. And Evans is working on setting up an official visit. I think with interior defensive line recruiting being what it is this cycle with limited numbers at the position because of what transpired last cycle, offering Evans this late in the game, it's pretty telling of the level of interest and what Penn State thinks he can accomplish at the next level. Because, it's we've reached the point in the cycle where actions kind of dictate levels of interest, right? If you're offering a guy in May before official visits start and you're working to get him to campus for an official right after that, it speaks to how interested you are in that prospect. And that's where things are at with Evans. And look, he called Penn State one of his dream schools to me. He's a big fan of James Franklin and the way the Penn State program operates. It's something that he's looking forward to seeing with his own eyes at some point in June. And it's just, I think this is one to keep a pretty close eye on moving forward. Again, he's a regional guy. He's talented. His stock is on the rise. He's not rated on 247 Sports right now, but that's going to change here really soon. And I think that Penn State made the right call jumping on him. And Michigan State wound up offering later in the day. Yeah, I think this is kind of just the start for Evans after what he accomplished in Baltimore. Now, circling back to the other two, Yvonne Kamaju he's interesting because he took a lot of his reps on the edge, and he did really well in those reps. Penn State sees him more as an interior guy. I can understand why, because that's a long-term projection thing that he's going to be able to add the size and play on the interior. And he's going to be one of those guys who could, probably give you some value in being one of those interior pass rushers, because you see it with him on the edge. He's very fluid, and he moves very well. He's a finesse move kind of guy on the edge, and he does a pretty good job with it. So whether he's on the edge or on the interior at the next level, I think he's going to be a pretty good player. Penn State's getting him for the official visit during the first weekend. And again, with that interior, we kind of have to monitor where the board stands at that point. That's something we're hoping to get a little bit more clarity on. With Harris, he's set for his official visit during that final weekend, June 21st through the 23rd. And, Penn State's involved with some pretty high-level edge rushers elsewhere, so I want to see what comes about with those guys. But if Harris makes it to his official visit, I mean, based on the conversation I had with him, the Nittany Lions are in a really, really good spot. Loves James Franklin, loves Deion Barnes. He wants to be the next big-time Maryland guy to go to Penn State and have himself a nice career. So I think that if he makes it to his official visit, because, again, they're going to be plenty of moving parts before that, I think it'll be telling because Penn State's going to be in a good spot when he gets to town. But we'll see what comes about on that front.
All right, and I want to get a running back real quick too as well, Tyler, because kind of a multi-pronged approach here as well. You got a Penn State commit in Alvin Henderson, recent Penn State commit at the running back spot, popping up on another campus down in Auburn for a visit. And that's not necessarily surprising because Auburn was hosted him a bunch and almost landed his commitment along the way. And then you've got Jabri Wallace Coleman out of the Imhotep Institute in Philadelphia, the number 38 running back in the nation, according to 247 Sports Rankings. He was at the Baltimore camp. He's got an official visit to Penn State coming up. They've got 3 running backs, including Henderson, already on board. Can you untangle the web a little bit for us?
I think running back recruiting is a very interesting storyline at this point in the cycle. Henderson, his commitment, it was a big win for Penn State, but it came with the feeling that Auburn was never going to go away, and Auburn gets him back to campus. And, it's May. He's still going to make that official visit to Penn State during the commit weekend, June 14th through the 16th, and I think that'll be Penn State's chance to really solidify things with him even further. But it's May, and early signing periods in December, and Auburn's not going away. So what direction is this one going to go? Man, it's tough to say right now because I think Auburn's main pitch from conversations I've had is, getting Henderson back to campus and letting him see with his own eyes what he can accomplish in Auburn's offense. That's been kind of the main pitch to him. I'm not sure I'd go as far as calling him a flight risk, but it's very wishy-washy at this point, it seems. I think, him popping back up at Auburn so soon after his Penn State commitment, it tells you something. And I think that Auburn's going to get a very long look from Henderson, regardless of what happens on the Penn State side. Penn State's done all of the right things recruiting him and getting him on board, getting him committed and keeping him committed so far. I think he has a ton of respect for Jaywan Sider, and the relationship there is in a good place. He's gone as far as calling Sider a father figure in his life, aside from football. So I have felt that as long as Sider's around, Penn State's going to have a good chance to keep Henderson, but I don't know, man. At this point, it feels like a 50-50 proposition. So maybe not flight risk territory yet for me, but it's something to keep an eye on. And I think that's one of the reasons they're still involved with a guy like Jabri Wallace Coleman, because I do think they're going to sign 3 running backs in the 2025 cycle. It's kind of a matter of who. Tyke Hayes is not going anywhere. Yeah, Aliquippa guy who loves Penn State, has that tie to Terry Smith, so he's not going anywhere. It's going to come down to what happens with Henderson, what happens to Keandre Barker. But Wallace Coleman has that official visit. It was originally June 7th through the 9th. He's going to be on campus now 21st through the 23rd. He's liking Penn State. He's been to Penn State more than anywhere since he backed off his commitment to Georgia. Michigan State's in the mix. UNC's in the mix. Oregon is somewhat in the mix. We're going to have to see if an official visit comes about on that front. Those two sides have been talking more, but Philly guy, Penn State always talks about keeping top in-state talent home. The contact with Wallace Coleman has continued despite 3 running backs being committed. So you could see he kind of fits that billing of an in-state guy. Penn State really likes him, like to add to this class.
I got a few follow-ups on three of these guys. First off, Alvin Henderson, number 16 running back in the nation at 247 Sports, number four-star running back prospect, and he plays ball and he lives about 2 hours south of Auburn's campus. Just keep that in mind. We're 6 weeks into this commitment. There's about 7 months left until signing day. So we'll see where the roller coaster takes us with Henderson. Kind of the same deal with Keandre Barker. I know you kind of brushed by that a little bit, but he's back at his former high school in Arkansas. He had went from Arkansas to Texas last year, from Texas to Miami Central, we thought, this offseason, and now he's in Arkansas. So that's really an interesting process where he's a guy who's got a national offer sheet, and we want to see him play more. And so you're right. It feels like Tyke Hayes at this point is kind of like the settled aspect of the running back conversation. And then we're all over the place a little bit. My follow-up on Jabri Wallace-Coleman is a fun curveball in case folks haven't been following Brian Doan's coverage at Lions247. But might Penn State not be done at Imhotep Institute just yet in terms of Zahir Mathis, who has long been considered the premier prospect in Pennsylvania or among them in the 2025 cycle? He did not include Penn State in the top 4 or 5 lists that he put out last year, and then he put out a Penn State, Ohio State commitment last winter. So you think that's kind of door shut, but maybe the door cracks open just a bit here, Tyler?
It's still cracked open a little bit. I don't want to divulge too much for our subscribers, especially when it's a guy committed elsewhere. It's a sensitive thing. But no, Penn State has stayed on Zahir Mathis, and there that hasn't been necessarily turned away. So I think there's a chance that maybe Penn State could get this one done. You posted an interesting quote on the board earlier this week about James Franklin talking about keeping the top ranked guys in Pennsylvania home and how it might not be as easy to do so during the 2025 cycle, but they were going to continue and they were going to keep fighting to get that done. Who was the top ranked guy in Pennsylvania at that time? Zahir Mathis. It's not him anymore, but it was Zahir Mathis at that time. So take that for what you will if you're a Penn State fan.
Yeah, and I believe that was after he had already dropped the top list of finalists that didn't include Penn State.
Right,
so Franklin still put it out there. He was like, we still feel like it doesn't look good right now. I'll acknowledge that, but we still feel like we can finish out that recruitment too. And I thought that was a really interesting little salvo out that he put out there. And I thought that's what I heard in December. And when the Mathis kind of popped up on the radar again this week, I circled back, and that's indeed what we heard in December. Something to keep tabs on as well. Daniel, thank you for sitting by. Folks who have been following on YouTube can attest to this, but you looked fantastic during that stretch while Tyler was discussing some recruits. And Tyler, great job breaking down some of those conversations and observations.
Now I got to sit here and do my AJ Hall.
But this is going to be rapid fire because we're focusing beyond 2025 to finish out our camp coverage here. And by the way, there's going to be a ton of camp coverage in June, but this is just kicking things off. Dia Bell, I think, is the best name to begin with here because he is considered a top 5 quarterback in the 2026 cycle. He is the son of longtime NBA player Raja Bell, who actually was on that 76ers squad that went to the NBA Finals in 2001. And he has made a name for himself. I mean, he is firmly inside the top 30, firmly in that mix for 5-star status at quarterback. And he was back in State College for the Elite 11 camp, but he's been back in State College a bunch generally. I think, Tyler, you pointed this out on our board last week. Dia Bell has been to Penn State more than any other campus of late. So, Daniel, what did you see from the player himself when we got a football in his hands?
Yeah, to go back to the visits, Dia Bell said that he'd been on campus on Saturday, I believe, and that was his 5th time on campus. And he said
Florida kid, by the way, Florida kid here.
And he said that he's kind of seen it all, he's done it all, and so the next time that he comes, he wants to bring some of his teammates from American heritage who maybe haven't seen Penn State before, haven't been on campus. And you had a good joke, Tyler, that Penn State won't turn those guys away, given the caliber of that program. But watching Dia Bell play, I mean, he was just very. It was kind of like talking to him. He was just very polished, very in control, kind of knew what he was doing, where he wanted to go. I came away very, very impressed with him. It was very entertaining to watch him throw. I mean, you can see some of the athleticism, you can see the arm strength, you could see the composure. He was just very, very engaged the whole way through, which is something that you really want to see and that you like to see in this type of environment. So, I think that, this time next year when, the Elite 11 regional, whether it's in State College or not, or whichever regional Diabel goes to, it wouldn't be a surprise to see him emerge as one of the top performers with an invite to the finals. I just came away very, very impressed. You can kind of see it when a player has everything together and kind of knows what he's doing, how he's going about things. And it all lined up with his early ranking from 247 Sports.
Tyler, how did Penn State do this? I mean, this is 1,000 miles away down in American Heritage. It's a hot button school when it comes to recruiting. You're going to always have people focused on it on different staffs across the country at the Power 4 level. Why is Penn State suddenly finding itself as the most frequently visited and in such a strong position for a very competitive recruitment?
I think there are a couple layers to it. First of which is Diabel has a very strong appreciation for James Franklin. He has a lot of respect for him and really just loves the way that he runs his program. And I think that's something that he could see himself fitting into. What's impressive for me is that this recruitment has essentially already, given he's a 2026 prospect, it's already survived 2 offensive coordinators. He started out as a priority target for Mike Ercius. And when Mike Ercius got fired, you don't know how that's going to change in terms of level of interest because, your relationship was with the previous OC. How are things going to go from that point on? But he's really taken a liking to Danny O'Brien, who has been there from the start. So that continuity has helped Penn State. And he likes Andrew Koldenicki, too. He likes the direction of Penn State's offense. He likes his scheme and the way things are heading. So that is one part of it. The other side is he has ties to the Northeast. His mother is from the Northeast. She's from New Jersey. So, it's that's a little interesting bit to follow. And obviously, Roger Bell played in Philly to start his career. So
he played everywhere, though. He's got a lot of time.
Look, it plays a role. There's just overall familiarity with the area, and that helps Penn State. It's he likes the area, so that's why he keeps coming back. I think it's been one of the more impressive recruiting jobs I think Penn State has done so far. But are they going to be able to close? I'm not sure, but they put themselves definitely in a spot to do so when it comes time for Bell to make a call.
Yeah, I think it's really impressive. Just I think no matter how you look at it, why it's there for Penn State to be this centrally involved in Diabel's recruitment process at this stage, I think it's just says a lot about what the staff has done with him and with his family. Another huge name that we're going to be aware of in the 2026 class, he already has his 5-star status at this point from 247 Sports, and those don't go out often early. So this is a guy coming up to his high school junior year as of this fall, Emmanuel Iannacho out of Georgetown Prep School in Rockville, Maryland. He's considered the top overall offensive tackle recruit in the nation for that cycle. And clearly, when you think about this region and the footprint that Penn State wants to fill, he may be the biggest name around here.
Man, that kid has some special potential. I think that his frame, first off, he's not far off from the 6'7", 340 we have him listed at. So,
Jeez.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And I wish you guys could have seen what he did during one-on-ones. It was ridiculous. I mean, every rep was pretty much dominant. He's not a finished product, right? I know I'm gushing over him, but his footwork needs a little bit of work. And I think that there are his lateral quickness, isn't quite there yet. But he's a big kid, and his frame is elite. And you see it during one-on-ones where he's just manhandling some of the better players at the camp. Zion Ellie is one of the best edge rushers in the 2026 class, and Emmanuel Iannacho had no issue with him during one-on-ones. So I mentioned it on the board. I mean, if he puts it all together, there's franchise left tackle potential there. I completely agree with the assessment that he's our top-ranked tackle in the 2026 class. I think he's got a really good chance to stay there, and that's good news for Penn State because this is an elite prospect who really likes the Nittany Lions early on. He visited for the blue-white game. He's plenty familiar with Olu Fashanu's development, him being an area guy, so he could see himself, kind of being next in line in that regard. But there's going to be a national recruitment with every single top-tier program after it. Penn State's doing well early. Now we're going to see how they weather the storm.
Daniel, we're going to go double dip from what we saw at State College for some younger guys beyond the quarterback position, and then we're going to send it back with 2 for Tyler Calvaruso to wrap up this camp conversation. The two that I thought stood out were Larry Moon, who you mentioned at cornerback. He's a guy that we've known about for a while. Penn State offered him as a freshman, and at Aliquippa, it's a program that obviously you're going to have attention on from Happy Valley. He's over 20 offers, so he's a known commodity. We're not necessarily finding some diamond in the rough, and you could probably really say the same about Leighton Von Brandt, another 2027 prospect. Pretty close, if not right on the money, to what he's listed at 247 Sports halfway through his high school career. 6'7", 245 pounds. What I loved about Von Brandt, who's out of Delaware, Middletown, Delaware, is that he was vocal. He was like coaching up his peers. He might have been coaching up guys that were a year older than him at some point, but he was vocal in between reps. He was winning reps. It was a very abbreviated look at offensive line versus defensive line. I don't want to pretend that it was what Tyler saw, epic battles all afternoon. It was really before the quarterbacks and receivers and tight ends took the field and took over the game, the thing. But you and I were there, and we saw it take place, and respectively, you, me, and Andrew Ivins, our director of scouting, brought his name up, I think, to our board or to each other without realizing that we were already awake. We all thought this kid stood out, and I think that says a lot about Leighton Von Brandt. Again, out of Delaware, Penn State has offered him before his junior year of high school, and he's got a few Big Ten offers already in his back pocket.
Yeah, I think I was the third one to post about Von Brandt in the thread. And, after I posted, I refreshed it, and you'd mentioned him, I think, like 2 minutes before, and Andrew Ivins had brought him up, I think, like a half hour before. So I think that I think our eyes were all drawn to the same place. Like you said, a really big kid, very vocal, got work on both sides, both left and right tackle in that kind of abbreviated one-on-one setup. And I think that you saw him, he was able to kind of, reset if he lost his bounce early. He just kind of looked very locked in and knew exactly what he needed to do. But I mean, that frame is very, very impressive, and definitely what kind of drew your eyes to it. And then once you saw him move, it was kind of like, okay, yeah, I definitely see this. So he's definitely one to watch. I think.
Daniel, can you see Phil Troutwine, maybe with a couple other recruits, but like during that lunch period during the camps, can you just see Phil taking this kid into Haluba Hall and spending like 20 minutes getting down to the details with him, and the kid just soaking it up?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I can see them, whatever commits are there this summer, I can see them, slotting him in between, I don't know, Owen Alicine and, somebody else. Like, I think that he's someone that, is going to get a lot of attention, and it'll be really, I think fun to watch. It's kind of nice to have a name highlighted, name with a bullet next to it going into camp season, like this. With Larry Moon, we saw him camp last year. He's someone who's been around for a while. I thought that he looked very competitive. I think he got beat by Lyric Samuel on one rep that I was watching, but I think with I didn't watch the whole defensive back group a ton, but in one-on-ones, you just want to see someone who's being competitive, who's someone who maybe has a little bit of an edge at that cornerback spot, and I think that really is what we saw from Larry Moon. It's still a lot of time to go there out there in Western PA, but I do think that you see the traits of a solid college cornerback. We know the track record that Penn State has, and if Terry Smith is interested in you and looking at you this early, you're probably doing a lot of things right, and you probably have a pretty good ceiling. So I do think that Moon and Von Brandt were two of the guys in that kind of all 22 section, outside of the pass catchers, who really took our attention, and we spent some time really watching.
2027 standouts starting to make their mark. It's time for us to start learning about them as well, believe it or not. But that's where we are in the process with recruiting. So a couple more names from Tyler Calvaruso as we wrap up the camp coverage here. And I specified these guys out of the 2026 class for reasons that are motivated for different reasons, I should say. Maurice Barnes out of Harrisburg, and whenever Penn State's involved with a kid from Harrisburg, that's important to know. And then Ben Whitver, a wide receiver. Barnes is a linebacker. Ben Whitver is a wide receiver, and this is a school that we just talked about, Powhatan High School down in Virginia. Who else was a wide receiver there last year? Matt Henderson, who will be transitioning to tight end for Penn State next year as a member of the 2025 class. So talk about Barnes and the tie-in there locally, a guy who has some history on campus, picking up an offer at that position at linebacker. We know about a linebacker out of Harrisburg who did pretty damn well here in Happy Valley not too long ago. And then another piece of that pass attack down at Powhatan, which must have been really freaking explosive last year.
Yeah, I mean, starting with Barnes, I saw him in person last year when McDevitt came to Jersey to play DePaul, home of 2025 with Mike Troutman, and Barnes was one of the best players on the field that night. He's very athletic. He plays running back, too, for McDevitt, and so he plays both ways. He goes both ways, takes a lot of hits and contact throughout the night, but, man, his motor is endless. I remember in the fourth quarter, pretty key spot for McDevitt. Barnes is flying around the field making plays. So I really like the prospect profile there. He visited twice during the spring. He visited April 6th and then again the following weekend for the blue-white game. A lot of that had to do with him wanting to get more face time with Tom Allen, familiarizing himself with Penn State's new defensive system, seeing how he could fit in that. Allen actually dropped by McDevitt to see Barnes, believe it was earlier this month, and so those two were forming a pretty good relationship. And then with Whitford, I wrote this morning, we have it up on Lions247, the evaluation of Matt Henderson wasn't the only thing to come with Ty Howell's trip to Powhatan. Whitver really opened some eyes during that day. Marcus Higgins proceeds to offer on May 5th. Those two have remained in contact. Whitver is going to camp at Penn State in June. He told me June 8th. He's still working on his camp schedule, for that subject to change. But it's looking like June 8th. He's going to be back at Penn State for a camp to work with Higgins. He's looking to get over to campus to learn more about the program, meet some more of the staff afterward. But Whitver looked good at Under Armour Baltimore. He ran really well in the 40 and during the gauntlet. Again, I mentioned it with Lyric Samuel earlier, how guys look fluid and, they go off without a hitch. Whitver was one of them. Penn State's his first big offer. Right now, I believe the rest of the list is off the top of my head, Charlotte, Liberty, Norfolk State, and UMass. I think that's going to change here pretty soon, especially as he gets active on the camp circuit and really gets around and shows off what he could do. But that wasn't just, an offer at Powhatan because Matt Henderson's on board. That was a legit offer, and I think there's something there with him. I like him. I think he's going to be a pretty good player.
All right, well, that's just a sample size of what you can expect from the camp coverage and conversation all summer long at Lions247.com. Really good stuff from both of you. It's always fun. I can't wait to get the band back together here in Happy Valley and cover a camp all together again, because there's a bunch of them in 7-on-7 tournaments. And we got just a few more minutes to tack on here on recruiting subjects, because it is a holiday weekend. Whether you're driving all over the place, we'll give you just a little more in the tank here on this episode of the podcast. And I want to start in our final stretch here. Just this next weekend is going to be a big deal. Official visit weekends, the following weekend after Memorial Day weekend. Really important to follow these, track them, because they often result in commitments, whether it's to Penn State or elsewhere, come midsummer, and then you've really got most of your class materialized, or you've got to start turning to Plan Bs and Plan Cs. And so that weekend that opens with May 31st, finishes June 2nd, Tyler, Quincy Porter, that's a primary name that we need to know. That's one that you wrote about yesterday. And I just want to kind of use this as a tease. By the way, 30% off VIP coverage at Lions247. But just as a tease, get people a little bit amped up for what's coming next weekend with our official visit coverage and really who's coming to campus, the opportunity in front. And Quincy Porter is a primary example, one of the premier receiver prospects in the nation out of Bergen Catholic in North New Jersey.
Yeah, these first two official visit weekends for Penn State are going to be huge. That third weekend is too, but really the first two are the big ones for Penn State. And make no mistake about it. Lex Cyrus, Jeff Exner, Matthew Allen, all these guys have come up at wide receiver routinely throughout the cycle. Quincy Porter is the top guy on the board. Penn State really, really wants him. And I know the old adage, North Jersey Catholic schools and Penn State, sometimes it doesn't work out. But Porter made it back to State College during the spring. And all accounts are Penn State helped itself during that visit and really put itself back in this mix, along with Michigan and Ohio State. So it's looking like a Big Ten battle here. But that's kind of just the tip of the iceberg for that first official visit weekend. There are going to be a ton of top targets in town. Porter is going to be one of the more important guys making it to campus now. Then again, that second weekend, there are going to be so many priority guys making it to town. So it's going to be a busy time over at Lions247. I can tell you that. And I definitely suggest sticking with us and staying tuned, because official visit season is always fun, and we're going to have a lot from all angles.
We already had the debut official visitor, the inaugural official visitor of 2024 here in Penn State. And that happened last week, a solo trip, and we previewed it a bit Iose Epinesa. I'm sorry, it's pronounced Yose, I believe, Epinesa. And we talked about this. His older brother, AJ, was a 5-star recruit, if I recall correctly, out of high school, out of Illinois, just like this Epinesa is. And you got him going to Iowa. He was a star there. Then he goes on in the NFL as a second-round pick of the Buffalo Bills, and he's still in the league. And now here's his younger brother. And so there's natural ties there to the Iowa program. He's pretty darn close in Illinois. And here he is in Happy Valley. What do we make of his situation? What kind of a needle movement happened here from the Nittany Lions? Is this a long-term name that we need to be aware of?
I think it is. I think the needle moved in a positive direction. It's tough because Miami and Iowa have built up a lot of goodwill with Epinesa, but I think Penn State was really impressed during this official visit. The feedback that we received from the visit is, Penn State hammered the development part of the pitch pretty hard, and that resonated well with Epinesa and his family. Because, you think about what Iowa accomplished with his brother AJ, who's on the Bills now. They turned him into an all Big Ten player. So they know what player development looks like. Penn State really hammered that home, that Deion Barnes could be the guy to tap into his potential. And, you're seeing a little bit of pedigree now with Barnes already, sending Chop Robinson off as a first-round pick, getting Adiza Isaac to the next level with the Ravens, and even, predating that, all the defensive ends Penn State has gotten to the next level, and some of those guys have thrived at the next level. So pedigree is important here in Penn State's pursuit of Epinesa. I think the Nittany Lions are there in this hunt. I think Iowa is going to be tough. I think Miami is going to be tough because he's got some good relationships down in Coral Gables. And, we're over here talking about development. Canes have Jason Taylor on staff. You talk about development, go play for one of the best defensive ends of all time. I think that would be a pretty nice experience for him. But Penn State definitely did well with Epinesa during the official visit. It was big to get him back and lead things off because he has a busy June where he wasn't going to be sure if he was going to be able to make it to campus. He did. Things went really well. Penn State's right in the hunt now, I think.
Yose Epinesa, number 15 overall recruit in the country, a 5-star, number 3 defensive lineman out of Edwardsville, Illinois. And I know that you said Iowa developed his older brother, and they can point to that. Well, older brother was a 5-star recruit, and I'm pretty sure older brother may have been just fine in getting to the NFL. He had gone to Alabama or Penn State.
Good point.
And I don't, maybe older brother watched a lot of games where the offense struggled to score 17 points in support of the defense. Yeah, I don't know what the vibe is like with the Iowa program, but we'll see. Appreciate the recruiting coverage. Daniel, let's finish here. 100 days as of today. The countdown to kickoff begins. Our series at Lions247 will be going day by day with the corresponding jersey number. No one wears 100 yet in college football, not yet. So we went with just a profile of the transfer additions for today to start. But I'm going to throw this question to you as we go into our holiday weekend here, Daniel. 100 days out. What to you is the biggest reason for potential optimism for Penn State fans out there right now? Let's go on a high note. I was going to say concern, but why do that?
Yeah, I think that it's the talent that is up and down this roster. You think about that class of 2022 from 2 years ago, very highly rated, a bunch of 5-star guys. Those are all juniors now. Guys like Drew Aller, Nick Singleton, Denai Dennis Sutton, KJ Winston, a ton other Abdul Carter, can't forget him. Those guys are the core of your team now. They're not young guys anymore. They have a lot of experience based on how these past 2 years have gone. And this is, why you sign a class like this. This is their chance to really make their impact. And I'm very high on what that group can accomplish. Obviously, you'd like to have seen more from all the wide receivers they signed in that class. But I think when you look at the top line talent that Penn State was able to bring in 2 years ago, those are the guys that you're really looking to be the tone setters for your team, to be the playmakers. And if all goes well, to be NFL draft picks next year. Can't forget Katron Allen either in that, in this group. So, yeah, I think looking at, the group of juniors that this class has, you combine that with getting those guys back for 6 years, Tyler Warren coming back for a 5th year. I just think that the talent on this roster is in a good spot, even with everything that they lost last year. I think also a reason for optimism, Andy Kotelnicki, what he'll be able to do, how he can put some of these offensive players into space, cater to their skill set. I think that, 100 days out, I'm putting together some travel plans for this fall. It's going to be here in a hurry. But I think that by the time we get to Morgantown and West Virginia at the end of August, I think that you're going to be looking to this junior class to be the tone setters and to be the engine for Penn State this season.
Daniel Gallen, Tyler Calvaruso. Always a pleasure to share the show with you. Talk to you both real soon. See you on the field for camp coverage not too long down the road. That'll be some fun stuff too.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks, man.
All right, great stuff from my colleagues at Lions247.com. Again, jump on board, 30% off VIP coverage right now at Lions247.com. Gets you on board for all of the upcoming camp action that we're going to be monitoring and putting up on our board. For now, I'm stepping aside. Another long show. We wanted to give you a lot for this Memorial Day weekend. Hope you enjoy it, whoever you're spending it with, however you're spending it. I'm off to the New Jersey shore. We'll talk to you real soon. We'll be back with a couple new episodes next week. Some familiar guests and maybe some new guests as well. Stay tuned. I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.